All right. Now I'm over here on page 43, which we've already covered. What I did here on the bottom of 43 and the top of 44, I thought the wording was a little bit awkward. And so I went ahead and redid it. And so I've kind of reworded it a little bit right in here. And I want this to be on YouTube, so if anybody's watching it, they can at least get the benefit of the revised copy. It's worded slightly different. Now, the material is saying the same thing, but I think this is a little bit clearer. I hope it is, at least. Okay. So right here, 43, and here's 44. And that last paragraph, or the last part of the beginning of the paragraph on this earlier page, and right here is the new material. This is your new material. And this up here, right in here, it's all your new material there. And that paragraph continues down to here, down to there. All right? Any questions? So if someone wants to look at it, you have an electronic copy of it. But if anybody's looking at it on YouTube, they can look it over, pause it, and look at it. I've given enough time now for them to do it. Of course, we're going to look at 4 basic forms, and these are not the only valid forms for categorical syllogism. And there are 256 different forms they can take, and a large portion of them are not valid. They won't prove their case. Right. Now, what we have then, as we go through, we went through this, and we have rules for construction of a syllogism. A syllogism, a categorical syllogism, has 3 terms in it, and it has three terms. There's a major term, and a middle term, and a minor term. These are 3 terms. We'll go back and we'll be looking at them. We're going to look at some things that are called syllogisms, and I'm going to be asking you what the major and minor and all these terms are. Now, I sent you a file that had basically 3 pages on it, and I requested that you print that file out, because what you'll do is, if you got that file printed, you can just flip through and see the rules that we're going to look at. Okay. Now we have 3 terms, and we want to find them in what some people are calling syllogisms. Well, the major premise contains the major term and the middle term. Okay. The minor premise contains the minor term and the middle term. Conclusion contains the minor and the major terms. And that's in all 4 of the forms that we had here that I have up here, these 4 forms right here. All right. Now, if we go back and review this, the term that's in the major premise and the conclusion, and it is the predicate of the conclusion. In this syllogism here, it will be the letter N. The letter N is the major term. It's the predicate of the conclusion, and it's in the major premise. It's also right over here. This is a universal. This is particular, and so it's also the predicate of the conclusion, and it's in the major premise. Okay. Now, we come down to this term here, it's the letter N in these, and that's your major term. Come down here to this one, the conclusion of the predicate of the conclusion is the letter S in this one. And it's also in the major premise, but it's in a different location than the major premise. And in the way I've got it set up, it's a different letter here. Now, these letters we're going to use now, N and S will be real important to us later. So we'll be using them. So in the negative syllogisms, these 2 negatives, universal negative right here, and a particular negative here, the predicate of the conclusion is still your major term, and it's in the major premise. All right, it's the first part of the major premise instead of the second part as it was in the affirmative syllogisms, okay? Now let's go back up here to the top one. The term that is in the subject of the conclusion, all right, that's your minor term. It's also in the minor premise. That's the letter C. And that's the same thing over here. It's subject of the conclusion. It's in the minor premise. So that's what we have here. That's your minor term. All right, come down here to this one. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion. It's also in the minor premise right there. All right. Here it's the subject of the conclusion, and it's in the minor premise. It's the letter C in all of these syllogisms here. Okay. Now then, we have the middle term. It's in both premises, but it's not in the conclusion. That's the letter S here. S here. All right. It's the link between the two premises. It's in both of them. See, it's in the major and the minor premises. S here again, S over here. All right. Here, it's in both premises, but it's the letter N, and that will be important to us later. We'll use that letter N later on. So just kind of hang with me there. Other logic teachers use letters P and Q frequency, or maybe S and P. Okay? I prefer S and N for a reason which we'll learn later. All right. So those are your three terms. Each term is found twice, and that must have three terms that must be found twice each. Any question? That's two of your rules. Okay. Now we're going to come down. I'm just reviewing what I'm doing.
I do have a question.
Yes.
If I may, if you could back up to the standard forms. The first one, figure one, I believe it is, all S are N, and the major premise. The minor premise, all C are S. Is C considered to be generalized if it's a general category that's used there? As for example, all birds are winged or something, winged birds, you know. And then all robins are winged birds. I'm just throwing this together. Robins being a subcategory of all birds. Would that still be considered generalized or particular? Because the conclusion will be particular to robins as well.
Robins probably, if you made it that way, you could still say all robins are or something here. All right.
So
you could still have it that way. All Christians are baptized believers. All right. All women Christians are Christians. All right. All women Christians are baptized believers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. My emphasis was trying to get clarity on when it becomes particularized versus general.
Let's go over here again. And the next one, this is particular. We're going to pick out one particular person or part of this group up here. All Christians are baptized believers. So all Christians, S is Christians, baptized believers are in. See, that's in. John Doe is a let's see. John Doe is a Christian. John Doe is a Christian. Let's change it to S. John Doe is a Christian. John Doe is a baptized believer. That's particular. It's one particular person of this group up here, of the group S. See, it's a subgroup. It's one person out of this S group. That's what that's saying.
In the other case, it's more than one. So particularized would be one only. In other words, in the first example, it was robins. plural. In this example, it's John Doe or whoever, and that's one person. So particularized is narrowed to one person in each case?
No, not necessarily.
No.
Could be a subgroup of it. Let me illustrate here again with all Christians are baptized believers.
Right?
We can prove that. And we can use some. We can say some elders are Christians. Some elders are baptized believers. Okay.
Okay,
Some means one, at least one. That's all
right.
I'm saying. We're not denying that by saying some are, we're not saying some are not. And understand that. Okay. Square of opposition.
Okay.
So we're picking out the elders of the church. We can pick the elders out as a subgroup of Christians. All Christians are baptized believers. And we could say the elders, we can make all elders, all faithful elders, let's say, are baptized believers, right? And all faithful elders are Christians. All Christians are baptized believers. All faithful elders are Christians. All faithful elders are baptized believers. That would be this argument right here. Okay.
Isn't the bottom line of what James is asking the difference between universal and particular? In universal, it's a totality of a category, whereas in a particular, it is part of, not necessarily all of, which is why in the examples he's got here, in the universal, your premises both are all, and then your conclusion is all. Whereas in the particular, you're using some in a minor premise and in the conclusion.
Yes, we're picking,
Yeah.
and we could pick a subdivision of this group, this S group up here. That's what I was trying to do there.
Yeah,
So,
the subdivision is what I'm really narrowing in on, because in both examples, you've used a subdivision. In the one case, elders. In the other case that I kind of threw together, I used robins as a subgroup of all birds.
yes,
So in both cases, we have subgroups.
yeah. This is a subgroup of C is a subgroup of S, right? It's one, at least one out of the subgroup, out of the category of S's. S would be Christians, and John Doe would be a C. He's one person out of there. He's a Christian. And so whatever we can say about all Christians, since John Doe is a Christian, then we can say that about him. Right? If we said all polar bears are white animals, then we could say polar bear rough and ready. Let's name one of the polar bears rough and ready. Rough and ready polar bear is a white animal. Does that make sense?
Yes, and in that case, it's particularized to rough and ready.
Yeah, and that one particular polar bear. That's what we've brought it down to. We could say we could use some, and some could be all the polar bears in the Bronx Zoo are polar bears. And then all the polar bears in the Bronx Zoo. Now, again, we made that universal, but it's universal. It's still a subgroup of this polar bears. Okay. So it has to be a subgroup of this up here. That's what right there. That's what it makes it. It's a subgroup of this. It could include more than one. It includes at least one. So some means at least one. It could be more than one. Okay. Does that make sense?
Okay. Okay, and then when does a subgroup belong in a universalized syllogism?
Well, it may be, we can make the subgroup here, right here.
Right?
It's right here. Let's just do this. All Christians are baptized believers. All female Christians, that's a universal category, are Christians. All right. All female Christians are baptized believers.
So the subgroup being all of a particular subgroup, it makes it universal.
Yes,
Okay,
universal.
that that was the clarity I was seeking to get. In the other case, you're choosing a subgroup, but only part of that subgroup.
We're guaranteeing we're doing at least one person, one part of that, one out of that subgroup with the word some. Okay.
Yeah, and if the subgroup is only one, then it would be universal.
Yes. Right.
Okay, then that's the clarity I was seeking.
Yeah. Because if we're talking about the president of the United States, there's only one of them.
Exactly.
So we could say something about him. He's more than 35 years old, or that's a requirement to be president. And we could say several things like that about him. Okay. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Sorry to slow things down.
Oh, that's good. It's a good question. Probably other people were worried about it. So don't apologize. That's what we're here. We're going to try to get this straight. All right. Now, we come down here. Here's the basic form of them. We have a quantifier that would be all or some, or no or none. And then we have the premises. The copula is the copula is in one of our appendixes is on the copulas. It's on the linking verbs. It's a linking verb, is or are or were, or one of those linking verbs. So what I've done in the back, I've conjugated all of the linking verbs, your basic linking verbs, gone through all the conjugations and all your tenses and moods and all that, okay? In that one of the appendixes. I've forgotten which one it is. Just a second, I'll look it up right quick. It's in appendix F, letter F. I should remember that. That's my last name, F for Fox. Okay. All right. Now then, here are the rules for construction of categorical syllogism. We went through them. They have to have three terms, and if we have two negative premises, we don't get a conclusion. We can't get a conclusion. If we have two positive premises, we have to have a positive conclusion. If we have a positive and a negative premise, we only get a negative conclusion. If both premises are universal, then the conclusion is universal. The term that occurs in both premises, we call that the middle term, must be modified by the words all or none or no. Okay, must be distributed. All right. So it has to have one of those three words: all, none, or no. Okay, must be distributed at least one time. Now we have to figure out what it means to be distributed. It's got to be modified by one of those words, either explicitly modified or implicitly modified. So we'll see that in the next page, I believe it is. Term that occurs in the conclusion modified by all, or no, or none or no, is distributed, must also be modified by all, or none, or no, that's called being distributed in both premises. In both premises, not just one, but both premises. And I probably ought to make that bold. I don't know, maybe I ought to, you might want to bold that, okay? I hate to use too much bold print, okay? But here's what it means to be distributed. We have our premises. This is an A-type proposition. In all A-type proposition, the first part, all SD, and I said S and N, I use the letters S and N. The first part is distributed, it's modified by the letter all, that's pretty clear. The second part of it, that's the part that goes after the word are, or the linking verb, is undistributed. So it's not distributed. For an E-type proposition, no S is RN, and both of them are distributed. Always will be. Now, we won't go into proving that they are. You're just going to have to take my word for it because I'm not going to prove them in this course. Okay. Good logic books will show it that they're distributed. Okay. And okay, so we won't be worrying about that. Right here, the I-type proposition, and it's some S or N. That's your I-type proposition. And they're both undistributed. Neither one of them is distributed. However, with the O-type proposition, that's your particular negative. The sum S or N, the second part of it is distributed. So that'll always be the case with these right here. So you can take that and just lay that out and got your A, E, I, and O propositions. And you can tell whether they're distributed or not. Any questions? I think I'll put those in bold. I've had them bold print throughout the book. I just make them bold here. See, I'm already changing the book. So, all right, there's your A, I, and A, E, I, and O proposition. That's all forms you can have. And so both of these are distributed. The first is distributed in the A. Neither one of them are distributed in the I. The last is distributed in the O. And again, you just take this little chart and have it printed out, and you can look at it every time and you can tell what's distributed. Right? So we'll be taking that, and we'll be using that, okay? Do you have questions now? All right, the first thing we want to do with an argument, we're going to look at some arguments. We're going to test it for validity. If it's not valid, just don't even worry about it. It doesn't prove anything. And you show it's not valid, it doesn't prove anything. You don't have to worry about the major minor premises, whether they're true or not. And so, because the argument, even if they are true, doesn't prove anything. Doesn't necessarily prove the conclusion that they're trying to draw from it. Now, our propositions, out of these, we have four forms. So we have 4 to the 4th power. That's 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. 4 rows in a four fours in a row multiplied by each other. And that's 256 possible syllogistic forms, according to Copy. And according to mathematics, that's what you'd expect. Out of those, 256, 24 are valid. And we'll be looking at some and we'll show why some are not valid, okay? 15 are unconditionally valid. Now then, the arrangement of the forms, we've been through this already and just basic reviewing. We have the middle term and in the first premise and the second premise. Notice how they're arranged. It's how your middle terms are arranged here. Middle and middle. I'll just move my mouse around it. Over here, the two middle terms are right here. And here, the two middle terms at the beginning. These are there at the end of it, and they're at the beginning of the premise here. Then they're here and here. Notice over here, they were here and here. Now, a lot of times, the books will draw a line, and they'll draw it from here to the middle term, and they'll draw it down. And then they'll draw a line down here, make a V out of it. Then they'll draw from here down, and they'll go up like this in the V. And a lot of the books will do that. That's to kind of give them an idea. Here are your basic figures. You have figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4. So your P and M's are arranged in different order, S and P's. They're arranged in different orders in these. You have S and M the same. M and S are turned around in these two, say they're reversed. You have a P and M and P, and then P and M, they're reversed. You have an M and P here, and an M and P here in the same order, and a P and M and a P and M in the same order. These are all 4 figures that you have, right? The AAA proposition is only valid in figure 1 form. All right. Only valid in figure 1 form. Notice it's not found in the figure 2 and figure 3 and figure 4 forms. It's not valid. Is that clear? Now let's go back and see an AAA proposition. All right, we go back to those 4 basic forms we had. This is an AAA proposition. All S are N, all C are S, all C are N. All 3 are A-type propositions. That's the only form. That's the only way this is valid. Okay. Right. And your AII is only valid in that form too. Let's go over and take a look at it. AII. AII, there's AII. We have it, AII valid over here. I'm sorry, it is valid over here. We'll show that later why it is. Okay. But we have it valid right here and we have it valid here. Those are the 2 ones we find. Okay. Any question now? All right. Let's go back up to this form here. Let's see where our middle term is. Middle term is here and here. All right. And here and here. See, the middle terms are here and here on this one and on this one. That's A form. That's A form. So we got last. So let's go back and see which figure that is. You got to see which figure it is. They're last. The middle terms are last. That's the figure right here, and that's where that middle term is last. It's figure 2. See what we got? Those are both figure 2. And so let's go back to those forms and see what they are. And we have an A proposition, and we have an E proposition, AEE. AEE. And this over here is an AOO. AOO. So it's an AOO AEE. Now let's see, that was figure 2, wasn't it? Go back and look at it. Yes, it's figure 2. Figure 2 is AEE and AOO. Those are legitimate forms. Okay, they're valid. So we got this form and this form, and we have here and here. Those are the 4 that we started with, those 4 forms. Okay. Any question? All right. So now what we're going to do, here's some of the conditionally valid, and we showed the various forms. I already did that last week. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of it now. I'm going to leave it back on these forms so we can come back to it if we have to. If we need to. Come right back to that table if we need to. All right. I'm going to get out. I'm going to share screen now. And I don't know which one. I'll try this. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
All right. These are the exercises that I sent you, and I'll go back through these. I got these answered on another file, okay? And so I'm on the wrong file, okay? I want to go back Get out of it. Which one did I get? Did I got that one? I think I did. So let's get this one. And that's what I want. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Here are those questions. Got the questions in black and my answers are in red. Of the four types of propositions, A, I, E, and O, which ones are consistent with each other? Now, to be consistent, they must both be true at the same time. And so the A and I propositions are consistent if the A type proposition is true. They're consistent. Right? Now, what you get into, if they're not consistent, then you have a contradiction, see? So be aware of that. And they have to be consistent. And it's possible for the E and O type propositions to be consistent if the E type is true. And it's possible for the I and O types to be consistent if both are true. Now we get that from the square of opposition chart, okay? All right. Now, let me go over to the square of opposition chart. We may just spend all the class period on just these questions here, probably will. So I'm gonna go over to the square of opposition chart. We're gonna come back to it. And I hope you get it out and have it out in front of you. It's what I hope you do. So if you got it out right in front of you, you can see it, okay? Right. So right here, I'm gonna stop. Oh. I'm gonna have to put the square of opposition chart up there. There it is. Now let's see here. The I and A are linked. If the A proposition is true, if it's true, then that implies the I proposition is true. So if A is true, then I is true. That they're both true at the same time. They're consistent. All right. Let's go over here. If the E type proposition is true, then it implies the O type proposition. So if it's true, then Gary, I'm in class. All right. Okay. If the E type proposition is true, then the O type proposition is true. So they are consistent. Okay, they're consistent. All right. So they're consistent. Now then, let's look here. If they have to both be true at the same time to be consistent. And we can have the I and the O are subcontraries. They can both be true at the same time. So if they're both true, they're consistent. So we have consistency. They can be consistent. They can both be true at the same time. That's what we're saying. Any questions or comments? Want to see that? Now, what's the relationship between the A and the I? Well, the A implies the I, but we can also say something else. If the I is true, then it contradicts the E. Everyone see that? They contradict one another. So if the I is true, the E cannot be true. The E has to be false. If they contradict, one of them's false, the other is true. So if the I is true, the E is false. Now, what we say here is, if the I is true, the E is false. But if the I is not true, the I is not true. If it's false, then the E is true. Everyone see that? They flip. So if I is true, the E is false. If the I is false, the E is true. Now, so if the I is false, then we can say something about the A. indirectly, because if the I is false, that means the E is true. Does everyone see that? Anybody not see that? Now, the E and A are contraries. They cannot both be true, but they could both be false. Well, if I is false, E is true. That means that if I is false, that means that A cannot be true. Now, we could figure that out without all of this square of opposition. All Christians are baptized believers. Some Christians are baptized believers. If you falsify that at least one is a baptized believer, you falsified the A-type premise, but you did it indirectly. If this is false, this is true. If I is false, E is true. And E and A cannot both be true at the same time. That means A must be false. So if I is false, E is true. E is false. A is false, I'm sorry. If I is false, A is false. Okay. Same thing would happen down here with this one. E implies O. Okay. That's called sub-implication. And we can come here. If the O is false, that means the A has to be true. Since the E and A are contraries, they can't both be true, but they could both be false. If A is true, then E has to be false. So if the O is false, indirectly it implies the E has to be false also. Any questions? Everybody see that? All right. Now, we're going to go back and look again. And I should have put this square of opposition chart on my assignment for you, is what I should have done. All right, we'll go back again. And I think this is exercises again. I won't. And I'll go back to here. All right, we just showed those. All right. Now then, of these four propositions, which one are inconsistent? Now we get the definition of inconsistent. So these are terms that will be used in books. They'll say they're inconsistent. Now, this would be important if someone was saying, well, what you're saying is inconsistent with something else you said. This is how we know they're inconsistent. From the square of opposition, the A and O types are contradictory. Well, they can't both be true. Okay, they're if they're inconsistent, if they both cannot be true at the same time. Okay, all right. So the A and O types are contradictory, and so they're inconsistent. The E and I are contradictory, so therefore they're inconsistent. The A and E are contrary to each other, therefore they cannot both be true at the same time. So they're contrary. Now, see, contradictory and contrary are different. Any questions? All right. Now, which ones are related by implication? Well, two propositions are related by implication. If the truth of one is sufficient, it's all you need to prove that the guarantee of the other one is true. Well, from the square of opposition, the A guarantees or implies the I. The E guarantees or implies the O. If you take the square of opposition chart. And I introduced some other implications earlier, just a minute or two ago from these. I showed those. All right. All right. What is required for propositions to be logically equivalent? They're logically equivalent if the first implies the second, and the second implies the first. All right. We'll do this later. We have a whole appendix with things that are logically equivalent. So we'll be looking at that. This is how we can prove something to be true. We can do it indirectly. We can do that. So we'll develop this more later. What is required for them to be independent of each other? Well, they're independent if the truth or falsity of one has nothing to do with the truth or falsity of the other one. For two propositions be independent, neither proposition can imply the other, and the proposition must be consistent with each other, right? Because if they're inconsistent, there's a relationship to them. If one is true, the other is false. Say, so we can't, again, they must be consistent, right, with each other. An illustration of this, we could say that something is independent as to whether or not we observe the Sabbath. The law of Moses, under the law of Moses, they observe it, we don't observe it. They could both be true. We could have both of them true, that we do not observe it and they did observe it. We're not obligated to observe it, they were obligated to observe it. And so those two are independent of each other because they're under different dispensations. And so they're independent. And we have sub-implication, and I gave that to you. The A implies the I, and the E implies the O proposition. We have super implication. I went through that as well just a minute ago, and I'll come back and I'll go back to square of opposition and show it again in a minute. Right? Right. The three rules to arrange an argument in standard form. Proposition must begin with the words all, some, or no, or none. Both the subject and predicate must be either a noun or a noun clause. The verb joining two terms must be a being verb. That is, are, was, were, Appendix F. And I believe our last question is this. What are the 6 rules for a valid categorical syllogism? Got to have exactly 3 terms, each of which appears twice in distinct propositions, and each of the 3 terms must be used in the same sense. You can't use a word in one sense in one proposition and change its meaning in another proposition. That's called equivocation. It's a logical fallacy. Right? The middle term must be distributed at least one time. It must have the words all, every, no, or none modifying it. The conclusion that is negative if one of the terms is negative. A negative premise requires a negative conclusion. That conclusion requires one negative premise. You can't have 2 negative premises. You can't have more than one. You won't get a conclusion from it. We'll illustrate that later. Conclusion is distributed if it has the word all, every, or each is also distributed. Every modifying it only if both the middle and the minor terms are distributed. Right? If both premises are universal, the conclusion cannot be particular. It must be universal. Right? Those are your rules. Any questions? All right. We'll get out of that and go into another one. I want to get into exercises. It looks like the same file, but it's not. Okay. Well, I dropped out of the file. Can you see it? Probably can't
No,
see.
sir.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it.
I don't see it.
All right. I'll get out. I dropped out of the file and I got to go back and find it again. All right. I hope that's the right one. All right. Now, can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right. Here is lesson 7. We'll be looking at this. We'll look at this file and I send it to you. We're going to look at the Hires-Blakely debate on instrumental music and worship. All right. Well, first, I want you to help me with this. Let's go to the conclusion and let's see if we can tell what the minor term is. All right, do you remember the rule for the minor term? Where is the minor term found?
Under premise and conclusion.
Okay, it's in the conclusion. It's in the minor premise. It is the subject of the conclusion. So,
Mechanical instruments.
the use of mechanical instruments of music in Christian worship. There it is. That is your, all right, that is your minor term. It is the subject of the conclusion. Okay. So we get it right there, and we get right there. So that's laid out for us. All right. Where is your major term found?
An act of,
Acts or actions which are sinful.
An act or action which is sinful. That is your minor term. It is the predicate of the conclusion. It's also found where else?
In the major.
Right there it is. That's laid out pretty good, isn't it? See how it's laid out? Now, what is this up here?
That's a correct start for a proposition.
Okay, yes, it is, but that's your middle term, isn't it?
middle term.
Yeah.
All right, act or action without scriptural authority, okay? And he should have added of worship, okay? So he has of worship here, and he doesn't have it here. So he's kind of got a little bit of he's off just a little bit in his form, okay? But he should have had of worship. That part right there was left out right down here. Did you notice that? Okay. But he's basically got a pretty good argument. At least he's laid it out pretty good. Okay. Any questions? So now we can figure out what his argument is. Anybody see that? Everybody see that? Now, what type proposition is it? What type proposition is the first one? A, I, E, or O?
A.
A.
A type proposition. Everyone agree? All right, what do we have down here?
I.
We have an I type proposition, okay? All right. All right. So it's an A, I, and this is an I. I. Now, what figure is it? Where's your minor term? A middle term, rather, before it is. It's there, and it's right here. All right. All right. Okay. And it should have added Christian worship in there, okay. All right. So right there, hold on a minute. Acts or action.
What if you changed your minor premise to all use of mechanical instruments of music in Christian worship is an act or action without scriptural authority.
Yeah, that would make it an A-type proposition. Okay.
And is that not really what he is implying in his argument?
Yeah, he probably should have put all, but he didn't want to get off into some other tangents. Probably why he gave it particular, made it particular. Okay.
Okay.
So
I
the
wouldn't know what-
implied all is not there?
Uh,
Isn't this a subgroup of Christian worship?
yeah, and use mechanical instruments of worship. Yeah.
And that would be all instruments. He's not saying trumpets.
Right. It is universal in that sense. Okay.
Because he really wouldn't get into a tangent of the Old Testament because of the fact he's labeled this as Christian worship,
Right.
which removes the possibility of Davidic worship
Yeah.
from
See,
the first temple.
if you were affirming something like that, but you put that Christian worship in there, that rules out him being able to go to the Old Testament. He
Right.
probably did this on purpose. Okay. He's a pretty sharp dude. Okay.
Oh yeah, Alan Hires is very, very sharp.
Yeah. All right. So I suspect that's why he had it in there. Right. Christian worship. And so you need to think stuff like this out, just like you're pointing out there. Okay. All right.
So it's not general, it's not
No,
a universal when he's using the subgroup of,
we normally have the word all to make it universal. You could imply you could claim it's implicitly all, but it just doesn't have the word all there. That you could argue. Okay. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
yeah, this is why I asked my question earlier.
No.
And on this one, I looked at it and I struggled. I initially wrote down AAA, then I wrote down III, and then and I'm going, where is this going?
Well, when I debated Brother McDonald in Missouri on the role of women and the Great Commission, and that debate's on the internet. If you want a link, I can send it to you. I did not affirm a universal proposition in one of my points, right? And he was trying to make it because he wanted to get off on a tangent. So I didn't make it universal and have the word all in it. And I did it on purpose, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to get off on a wild tangent. I would have I wouldn't mind the tangent if we'd had 2 more nights in the debate. Could have debated the tangent. Does that make sense? So, anyhow.
And you make a valid point. He may have done this specifically because knowing what the arguments that Blakely was proposing, he did this on purpose. So that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah.
And yet, that's what you've been falsely accused of, brother. Sadly.
Well, Alan Hires is a sharp dude. I'll say that he's a sharp man. He is a judge. Of course, he's getting pretty old now, but
he doesn't get around too good either.
yeah. So, but at this time, he was probably in his prime. He was a pretty powerful debater. Okay. All right.
Is that link in your commission material that you have together, or is that just not part of that material? You wrote a book on that.
On what?
The Great Commission?
On the Great Commission? Well, I've got some of it in my Great Commission book. My debate, if you're talking about my debate with McDonald, was, I think it was 2011. I can't remember when it was. I'd have to go back and check my dates. But whenever we debated, he wanted to get off on other verses. I was wanting to stay on 1 Timothy 2. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want him getting off on other stuff. I wanted to get right to 1 Timothy 2. verses 8 through 14. That's what I wanted to debate. Right? I don't want to get off on some other stuff. Okay.
If you'd send that link, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, I'll send it to all of you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
And if you want, I've got a whole set of slides, PowerPoint slides, and I got a whole bunch that I didn't use. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next right here. This is Blakely. It was given Blakely, I believe was his name. It's his basic argument. And let's see what he argued. We're getting close to the end. Why don't we do this next week? So you have this file, I believe. So what you do is to start on this, and I want you to figure out what the middle term is, and the minor term, major term, and see what the form of his proposition is. And let's see if it's valid, first of all, and then we'll deal with some of the other questions about it. That's what you got to do when you take these things apart. You got to make sure they're valid. And then once you do that, if they're not valid, you need to show why they're not valid. Is that clear? Everyone got that?
Sure.
Okay. Now, let me quickly, before we go through, I want to type one up here. And we would say we could have an OOO proposition. We could have a form that was OOO. Why would it not be valid?
Two negatives can't have a positive
Two
conclusion.
negatives. Okay. Okay. It's not valid. What about an OOA? Still not valid. You got two negative premises. Does that make sense what we're saying? So you can rule out some of these forms. If you see a form that has two negative premises, it's not valid. Right? And we could examine to see if let me get rid of those. You can examine to see if the middle term is distributed at least once. You can apply all these rules. That's what we want to do. And let's look at this next week. So this will be my assignment for you. Go down to Blakely's and let's take as many of those as we can, and we'll just do that next week. That's what we'll do. All right. And once we finish that, we're going right into this one. This is another debate on women wearing an artificial covering in the assembly. All right. We want to examine to see if it's a valid argument, and if it's not valid, why it's not valid. Okay. All right. Just throw up what they call a syllogism, and it's not even valid. All right. Just be careful of it. All right. Any questions? So we're going to do as many as we can, and next week. Any more questions? All right.